Callaway Customs, just north of Paris, Texas, has a lot of work to do. Working on car restorations and resto mods can be very tiresome. Just wears you out. Sometimes makes you think you're in a drift Mustang. Well, when you're just in two seats on a garage floor, the work may get you to seeing who is the toughest alpha male in the shop, or stare at a blank wall in a stupor, more likely to want to hang yourself from all the miles and miles of wiring to go through. However, Callaway Customs defeats all these challenges, well, on this project, overcoming the tables and boxes full of parts and pieces of this 1965 Mustang for a complete resto mod build. Welcome to Road Odyssey for this part 1 video of the 1965 Ford Mustang resto mod build. Please like and subscribe, visit and follow my Facebook page, and use it to ask me questions or ask for specific content. And I have my YouTube channel with hundreds of car and travel video content for your enjoyment. I watched this majestic little white 1965 Mustang get trailered in on June 19th, 2024. And it was subsequently tucked safely away. But the story really begins with the engine build. Scott Callaway had begun to piece together the refurbished engine. So let's go through the engine pictures and videos and information that I have first. The engine was a 302 but was bored to a 347. Has a small hydraulic roller cam by Comp Cams with a Holley Sniper EFI 4-barrel carburetor, trick flow heads and rocker set, flowmaster headers, they'll change later. This engine might easily produce something like 434 horsepower and 431 pound-feet of torque. The engine build began on June 9th and was first tested just after July 29th, about a month's time when the customer had time herself to see the first start. That did not include time for having the block refurbished. In July, there was still a lot of the build to be done. Scott had the front pulley assembly installed using the March bracket. One head had also been installed. It's great to see how competent and confident Scott really is for building engines when he can talk on the phone and build at the same time. Well, just kidding. Well, actually not kidding. He is really good at this. He was in the middle of a semi-mindless task at the moment, and of course, I was supervising.
Got all the hardware and everything, and I got it in stock for price of $76.49.
Okay, can you bring it to Texas?
Yeah, bring it. I don't know, but I can ship it.
Well, I was kind of hoping you'd bring it.
Yeah, sorry.
Scott then did the silly putty valve clearance test to ensure, well, valve clearance and, you know, protecting the heads and the valves and all that. You need this stuff to be right. So this will basically tell if the heads, rockers, push rods, lifters, valves, etc. are all going to work properly together, at least to some degree. Here's a look at the engine and some of these components as of July 15th. Trick flow twisted wedge 11R heads and trick flow rockers with the carb perched atop that Edelbrock Super Victor 8.2 intake manifold. Designed for racing engines, allowing for good power gains, this engine is looking seriously fantastic and performance-minded for sure. And another look at that March front assembly bracket. By July 23rd, I saw it on the run stand. Looks great. It will sound great too. Up top, you have the Edelbrock AVS2 4-barrel carburetor, only for testing the engine initially because it's a more simple system and easier to use for just tuning the engine itself. It's less complicated than using the EFI system on the run stand. There are the flowmaster headers, which will end up not being used because they're too big and didn't allow for the steering rod to go through them. And of course, Maggie guarded the engine until time for the owner to see the first start. Time to get back to the car itself. I first saw work on the Mustang itself after the engine was running on about August 7th, less than 2 months after the car was delivered. A look starting at underneath, around the side for a decent view, and up front. Alex had installed all of the soundproofing, and they had the vintage air system tied up inside. Alex was also beginning to help get the breaker box and some wiring set up. Then he prepared the gas tank for use, getting the filler neck, sending unit, and such all fixed up. Meanwhile, Jason had been working on a lot of wiring. The vintage air AC dash unit was already basically installed, but he was getting all the wiring routed and other stuff set up for that. Wiring to the gas tank and the rear lights and such was also being done. Here's a quick look from August 9th. Still a long way to go. Looks like they were taking a break. Nope. Alex was getting into the brakes, installing the Willwood brakes all around. After hitting a speed bump on the brakes, well, some brake lines were wrong, so Alex had to wait for replacements. So I got this clip of the trunk gas tank wiring around back. One thing I caught Alex doing was adding some final parts to the filler neck. Now that's done. No again, just kidding. Nothing's done until it's done. The tank needed some refitment. They trimmed the edges a bit, then checked the fitment again, then removed it again. The tank needed to be properly sealed into the body cutout. Sometimes you might use body seal, sort of like a door seal or a gasket. Some people do nothing, but not in this case. They wanted a really well sealed trunk and all of that around the gas tank to not get rusted. So using the caulk style sealant adhesive removes more moisture out and away from around the edges. Now Alex self taps the tank into place, gets the filler pipe clamped in, and the tank is in for good. Later they cover the tank area with this sheet metal. Seems nice enough. Not sure if it'll be painted or not, but it sure does make it a clean look. After some of that trunk work was done, Jason had returned to wiring and checking out the old radio and its eventual install. When you build a car from the ground up, it's detail after detail to review to make sure and plan for all kinds of stuff. Speaking of that, let's take another look at the brake progress. Here were the brake lines the Callaways were given, and they were given the wrong stuff. Length, fittings, type, whatever. It was just wrong. Here's what the Callaways got a few days later and installed. Much better. They fit and they are metal braided performance lines, more suited for this application in terms of braking and lastability. And they also installed hard line connections into the body that just adds greater stability and lastability. Well done. Well, FedEx brought a good load of major parts. What could they be? Well, obviously important enough for me to include in these clips. Transmission parts, bell housing, clutch, flex plate, the tremic 6-speed transmission itself, and yes, the car's trans tunnel might need modification. Fairly typical. More on that later. Now, how about a little sidetrack? Here is the VIN that's on the driver fender. It tells us that this Mustang was, the number 5 says Wimbledon White, or 1965. The F, Dearborn, Michigan plant. The 07, hardtop. C stands for 289 two-barrel, which had 200 horsepower, 282 torque. The last 6 are the production number, which seems like a large number for being a 65 car. So with this production number for this particular car, it had to have been more like a little bit later, 1965. So pretty cool. The Callaways also have another old Mustang in the shop, the green one. It's theirs along with Tub Restorations as a shop car to sell after completion. Alright, back to reality. Pretty good pile of parts here. 2 things out of all of this provided by the owner that will not be used are the long tube headers and that sway bar. The sway bar just didn't work. This is the original display cluster, supposedly from 1964 and a half, but who knows, pretty cool. Had 87,000 miles on it. Well used car. Now here's the new Dakota Digital display. Very, very nice. And of course, over time, more wiring was done, and the interior with the vintage air had been completed, all the tubing and such. Jason was also getting more of the brake lines prepared inside the engine bay. Okay, you're ready to see more of the engine and transmission work. There's part of the clutch and throwout bearing and lots of instructions. Scott and Jason got the clutch on the engine as the other engines in the background patiently wait for their turn for their special car install. They took a break to consider the best place for the fuel regulator. Then back to the transmission install instructions. Yep, takes time and patience for sure. It also takes time and patience when it is suspected that the transmission had been dropped on one end or something like that, because they cannot get the transmission to shift into any of the gears while checking it, while keeping the transmission in the box in case they had to reship it. They had called Tremic and were told to remove that top little plate and move the gear dogs in there, which worked out. Just one of the many sidetracks the Callaways have encountered on this car. Moving on, they put the throwout bearing on the trans and got measurements which need to be very precise. So this was done more than once by both Alex and Jason to be very sure of their numbers. The values are for proper clearance, which they found out that they needed a few more shims, so they had to get that ordered. But shimming the throwout bearing means that the shifter would work better with the clutch, basically. Hey, time to get the engine in. Without the transmission though, since they had to wait for those shims for the throwout bearing and all that jazz, they got the mounting brackets on the engine. got the engine hoisted over the car, dropped it carefully, placing it in temporary bushings. They had some bushings stacked. They ordered better ones later and got them replaced. They were concerned primarily with the oil pan hitting that front rack, but that turned out to be just fine. Even Maggie was all concerned and had to inspect all of this. Man, this thing is looking really good. The car is going to look great. And poor old green Mustang must be feeling like a poor little orphan in the background there. Next day, August 28th, they had done more in the engine bay. Wiring related mostly, but lines to and from the fuel regulator, from the gas tank and pump, the main fuse down at that bottom corner, and the edelbrock EFI box wired on the driver fender. And a cool feature of the engine is the swivel oil filter connection. Interesting. Alex got the coil placed in the center of the firewall. I got back 2 days later, August 30th, and missed the transmission install. Jason had been working on the necessary details in that area. He showed me how they did need to make some cuts into the car to fit the transmission better. A couple more cuts were still needed to finish the fitment up around the shifter and such. On the right side of the shifter hole, it needed to be a little bigger. The cross member will also be buttoned up a little more later as well. Jason, was wiring again while I was there, getting the neutral safety switch done, cables to the battery in the car's rear area and whatnot. So going over the wiring instructions, working both from the bottom, inside the engine bay, and the cab, up top, whatever. Lots of moving around to get this little bit of the job done. Doesn't bother Jason at all. He loves it. Come September 4th to 6th, Alex was very busy getting precise dimensions for wheel fitment. With the Mustang 2 steering rack, plus the chassis parts used, it made for a narrow choice of wheel availability. This can often be a big challenge for customers to wrap their heads around and accept. Often finding wheel styles a customer wants, but then they can't find those styles for what will actually fit. Well, unless the customer is willing to pay for custom, sometimes one-off wheels. I hope this customer, well, any customer with a project like this, can understand that in this example, that for Alex to get any measurement for the rear wheels, he had to remove parts, readjust them, just to get an idea of the range of wheels possible for the rear. So this frame and chassis was put together by another shop, and this whole rear end was not completely checked. So it made it a bit of a task. All of this work got us from June 19th to September 6th, about 11 weeks. It's kind of mid-September as I make this video. I hope to have a good amount of continued progress for the part 2 video. Here we saw a lot of the engine build, some wiring, gas system, brakes started, VIN information, trans and engine install, some wiring, and wheel checking. So I'm eager to see what's next. Hope you are too. With that, please relax, take it easy, and I will see you later. Bye.